I'm a teenager and I've been in scouting/Boy Scouts for nearly all my life, and I really enjoy exploring with my friends and being trusted more as I'm older now. A few years ago, me and two girls named Amy and Harriet were asked to head into the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long, straight stick suitable for carving into a point. Bear in mind that I was a lot younger back then. Harriet was older and Amy only 1 year older than myself. We had been walking in deliberately the same direction as to not get lost, and memorizing the surroundings as we went to find our way back easily. About 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around and returned to the campsite. That's when the initial panic set in. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was non existent in the first place, like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one another appeared as all copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the correct direction while shouting out for help and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road, but very thin, separating the forest, splitting it into two. We did not follow the road as it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like this was out here in the woods, so we just kept walking. We eventually came to a road we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple regatta outdoors coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite. As by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for an hour and a half. She said she'd never seen us before, but she said there's another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. We frantically apologized for being so long and that we couldn't find anything. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and he was confused that we'd only been gone 25 minutes and that our free time was still going on. To this day, this baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long and our watches and phones had said we'd been gone for hours. The forest, we were lost and felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we entered an area that the concept of time did not apply to. I believe in the paranormal. However, this was so unlikely anything I've heard or experienced before. It literally was like we'd been in a time vortex or something, and that hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was very strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of the camp. This happened about 13 years ago. When I was a sophomore in college, I attended a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks, 6 guys, including myself and one girl, and they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particular isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you are almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees, very few streetlights, and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights, just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So, per the directions, we made a left off the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn, and to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see what exactly this was, stepped over the log, and noticed 2 narrow trails leading to different directions. This seemed like a good enough time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational, level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling we were being watched, but I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as my imagination. In any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared, not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. what would we come across that could take us down? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it was never ending, we came to a massive clearing, and I mean massive. It was a large, open field of unkept grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of the narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check this out." We all turned, and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows. What I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone. Because there was no way in, and because we all felt initially creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from and have a seat in the field and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit down, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing, and his expression dropped, and he pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean he was skipping around and grabbing a tree and swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed into that direction, and said, "Jay, look what I'm pointing at. Do you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second that he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm, and whispered, "What the fuck is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whatever this was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked out and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay screaming, "Holy shit!" I looked back and saw this flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in, and were peeling away closer to 5. Once we were at a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked in with each other about what just happened. My heart was pounding, and I knew everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are still friends, living in different states, yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, etc. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the others with something in the effect of, "The woods. That really happened, right?" It most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing manically in the woods at 1 in the morning, and they ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked into the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of. I used to do lots of camping trips with a friend of mine post-college. Most of our trips were in Montana, and that's where we both lived at the time, and that's where this story takes place. My friend Jude and I used to spontaneously leave on camping trips where we just pick a direction and drive until we found some cool place to hike and camp. Sometimes we'd look up trails and add 1 to 2 day backpacking adventures to these trips, but most often than not, we would end up in an empty campground or some pull off on a Forest Service road and set up our tent right outside of the car for the night. Looking back, it was wildly irresponsible because we never told anyone where we were going. We almost never had a plan, so if we were going missing, there would have been no clues to where we were to start looking. We also never had cell service where we camped. So the creepy camping story I had happened in 2020, where it was the height of Jude and I's spontaneous camping phase. I had taken a week off of work, and we wanted to go up to Glacier and hike and camp for several days, which we did. Since it was COVID camping, inside the park was not allowed, so we had to find random spots to camp every night. We stayed at one campground about 180 miles away from West Glacier on the way up, then found a different spot each night closer to the park. All our campsites near the park were between 10 and 25 miles away from each other. because it was difficult to locate spots that were both illegal to camp in and hadn't already been taken up by other park goers. This meant that we sometimes spent hours driving up random Forest Service roads looking for somewhere secluded to sleep, but we also managed to find something. The first night of our trip, we stayed at a campground near Drummond, which was about 180 miles from West Glacier. Early in the morning, when it had just started to get light, I heard something walking around the tent. This campground was occupied by a few other campers, so at first I thought that maybe one of them was looking for the bathroom. The steps were heavy and deliberate, like whoever it wasn't trying to be quiet. It was in the grass, though, so I couldn't hear individual footfalls. It was more like the sitting through and crushing of grass and twigs. Whatever it was walked within a few feet of our tent, coming from the side facing the woods, not the other campsites or the road. I was only half awake, and I remember thinking two things. One, I'm glad I made sure Jude locked the door of the car, and two, I really hope it's just a very bold deer and not a human. I was super tired and didn't want to think it was anything creepy, so I did my best to fall back asleep, and eventually the sounds stopped. Though I don't remember them ever moving away, they just weren't there anymore. Jude had prescribed sleeping pills and was a deep sleeper, so I assumed he'd slept through the whole thing. When we both finally got up for the day, I didn't think anything of it and didn't mention it to him. The second night, we were up by West Glacier after a day of hiking and found a spot not too far from the park entrance. It wasn't a designated campground, but was within a series of dirt roads in a wooded area. We'd seen other people pull off and camping out of their car just like we were. Our tent was set up right next to the car since there wasn't a lot of open space in the pull-off we'd found. Again, in the early hours of the morning, just when it was getting light, I woke up and heard someone walking around our tent. This time the grass wasn't as tall, and I distinctly heard the heavy footsteps of a person walking right next to our tent. Then around the car. Again, I remember being glad that Jude had locked the car the night before. The footsteps had come from the woods, not the road, and continued moving around our tent for a while. Then they eventually stopped without moving away. I again went back to sleep, then woke up for the day a couple of hours later with Jude and didn't think anything more of it. I assumed it was someone hiking in the area who'd cut through our campsite as a shortcut. I didn't mention it to Jude. The third night, it took us a long time to find a campsite. It was pouring rain, and we were both exhausted from a 13-mile hike. It took us 3 hours to find a place, and we finally settled on a pull-off on a dirt road above the Hungry Horse Dam. We were both uneasy about the spot because it wasn't off a Forest Service road, and we were a little worried we'd be bothered by traffic on the road or cops telling us not to camp there. It was remote, but not remote enough, if you know what I mean. The pull-off was kind of a little road that went to nowhere, probably used to push snow onto when plowing during the winter. It went about 50 yards into the woods, then ended with a dirt mound. There was an old fire pit and broken glass at the end of it, so we set up our tent near the entrance. It was still pouring rain, and Jude walked around in the mud in his bare feet while I kept my shoes on and examined the fire pit and broken bottles. Then we turned in for the night. I noticed too late that Jude had not locked the car, but he was asleep with the keys in his pocket, and I was too tired to get out and do it manually. Plus, it was still raining, and I didn't want to get wet. In the morning, just when it was starting to get light, I woke up and heard something walking around in the woods above our tent. I thought it was a deer at first, because the steps weren't as light as the ones I'd heard the previous morning. Then whatever it was came down onto the pull-off where our tent was and began moving around our car. The tent was set up only about 3 feet from the car, so I could hear whatever it was very distinctly as it walked. The ground was muddy, so the footfalls were more muffled. Then I heard the car door open. I remember I'd been only half awake until that point. I became fully alert then, but was still a little unsure of what I'd actually heard, so I didn't immediately get up. However, I kept listening. Whatever it was kept walking around near the car. There was no sound of another vehicle nearby, so whatever it was had to have walked here. As I listened, I heard the car door shut. I sat fully up at that point, waking Jude up and said, "I'm gonna go check that out." I honestly cannot believe my nerve in that moment, but being scared, numb, and sleep-deprived tends to make me stupidly brave. I immediately put on my shoes and opened the tent. By this time, the sound had stopped completely. Remember, the tent was right next to the car, on the same side as the woods. I would have heard someone walking away. I got out, and the first thing I noticed was that nobody was around or inside the car. It was Jude's car, and he's a bit of a mess, so no one would be able to fit in there if they weren't in the front seats anyway. The second thing I noticed is that the ground was muddy all around the car and tent, and the only footprints in the mud were from my trail, runners, and Jude's bare feet. I even followed his barefoot trail, making sure that every print was his. There were no footprints coming to or from the woods, nothing. I inspected the car and didn't find anything out of place, no signs of disturbances. I walked over to the fireplace and again could only find my imprints. Then I did the stupid thing and went past that fire pit into the woods. There, I found a weird makeshift shelter made out of pallets that had some blankets and woman's undergarments in it. It scared the shit out of me initially because I was pretty spooked by this point, and I thought there was a body in there. But upon closer inspection, the whole thing was rained out and undisturbed. Nobody had spent the night there in a long while. Even still, I didn't touch anything and only came within a few feet of the thing before turning around. I returned to the car and sat inside it while I waited for Jude to finish waking up. Then we packed up our tent and didn't mention it to each other at all that day. On the fourth night, we found a really cool spot below a dirt road on the west side of the park. We got briefly disturbed by a man walking to our campsite, but he just seemed like he was scouting out a place to camp with his family and didn't know we were there. That evening was otherwise uneventful, and we both went to sleep early because Jude wanted to catch the sunrise. I was afraid to miss my alarm, so I woke up in the middle of the night and immediately heard something moving around outside our tent. This time, it was right behind our tent in the direction of the way we'd come and where we left the car. I remember being kind of annoyed that this thing had started up so late, when all I wanted to do was sleep. Eventually the sound stopped, and I did fall asleep. In the early hours of the morning, we got up and broke camp before it got light. My alarm was super loud and woke Jude up too. I forgot about the sounds I'd heard in the night. He helped me pack up the tent and didn't mention it to him. I was pretty happy we were finally inside the locked car and were headed to our next destination though, but I had always been a tad scared of the dark. We saw a spectacular sunrise that morning. Afterwards, we were on our way to our get breakfast and coffee before heading home. Jude looked over at me and said, "Have you been hearing something outside our tent every morning?" I looked at him in shock and said, "Yes, remember I got up to investigate it yesterday?" And he said, "Yeah, that's really weird. Every morning I've been hearing it too." And we both talked about how strange it was, that we'd both heard it but never had thought it important to mention it afterwards. It was like, even though it was really unsettling, something subconscious had made us both think that it was nothing to dwell on. To this day, I get shivers when I think about hearing whatever this was. And I'm still astounded by the fact that I actually got up one of those mornings to investigate it. But in those moments, even though I remember acknowledging that it was creepy, I don't actually remember feeling very afraid, and clearly I wasn't too worried because I had at once thought to bring it up to Jude.